Have you ever wondered how you could develop your creative core? How you could think quicker on your feet and be more flexible in uncertain situations? In today's video, I'm going to talk about the 5 pillars of creative thinking so that you can become more creative, more adaptable, more quick on your feet. This will allow you to be in new situations that might make you feel uncomfortable or fearful, like getting on stage and performing, or going to a job interview and not knowing if you're going to be qualified or not for the position, or just meeting new people out and about, taking chances, risks, creating content, putting yourself out there. It could be any number of these things. For context, I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter, I have a band that I play in, also a writer, and I make YouTube videos like this, so creativity is a daily part of my life. And I also spend a lot of time researching and learning about creativity. So while I'm not an expert, creativity is something I'm very passionate about and have a lot to share. So let's dive in. The first question is, why should we want to be more creative? What is it about creativity that's so important for us to learn? And I think first, just to understand what creativity is will make a big difference in understanding why it's so important. All creativity is the ability to have novel and useful ideas. And it's very important for us to have this critical skill because we're going to run into a lot of situations in life where we don't know what the best answer is, or there is no best answer. And so to be able to think creatively is to be able to think of new and useful ideas for the situation that you're presented with. And this, again, comes into play when you are in situations that feel very uncertain. And that's the first thing I want to talk about, actually, is one of the number one predictors of people who are able to think creatively are people who are comfortable with uncertainty. Now, this makes a lot of sense if you think about it from a logical point of view. If something is certain, well, that would be knowledge. But if it's uncertain, meaning it's unknown, it's unclear what the answer is, well, then that opens up the window of opportunity for creative thinking to come in. So if you're ever presented with a situation where you know what the outcome is going to be, well, there's no creative thinking there. What you're doing is relying on prior knowledge. You're relying on experience. You know what's going to happen. You know what to expect. So what about when you walk into situations like a job interview, for instance, where you're uncertain of what the situation is going to be? Well, that requires creative thinking skills, because the ability to tolerate uncertainty and be comfortable taking risks in uncertain situations is a key predictor of creative thinking. Now, there's 3 responses you can have when you're faced with an uncertain situation. One is to freeze up. And this is what happens to a lot of people when they get really scared or panicked, is they kind of just freeze up. You get asked that question you weren't expecting, and you kind of start to stutter and choke up, and you don't really know what to say. So the other response would be to defer action. So what that means is like phoning a friend, right? Maybe you have a problem in your life and you just go, hey, can you just like tell me what the answer is? Or help me, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. Can you tell me what you would do? And you're deferring the action to somebody else to help resolve that uncertainty in your life or in your situation. But the third action is the one I want to talk about today, and that's creative action. So it's you taking action or generating an idea to solve a problem, and you're not relying on somebody else to give you the answer, and you're not freezing up. You're saying, you know what, I don't know what the best way forward is, but I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to try to resolve this uncertainty with an idea that I just came up with. And that's creative action. So again, you have those 3 options. You can either freeze up, you can phone a friend or look up the answer, or you can come up with an answer on your own. Those are pretty much your only 3 options when you're faced with an uncertain situation. So in the context of something like being on stage performing, I play in a band, right? So it can be really nerve-wracking to get on stage. And what happens if we're playing a set, we've rehearsed hundreds of hours, right? And we're up on stage and we're playing a set, and out of nowhere, I hear the guitar cut out. Okay, well, the guitar's amp just blew out or something. What do? Do I freeze and stop playing? Or do I look to somebody else and say, hey, what am I supposed to do, right? No, you wouldn't do that. In that moment, you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. I mean, personally, I would just keep playing until somebody told me to stop, because the show must go on. But being able to tolerate uncertainty and to be comfortable with those unknowns, those things that you aren't sure are going to happen, is a huge predictor of people's ability to solve these problems on their own. And that tolerance of uncertainty will build up your capacity to feel like you have power and agency to take control of your own life. Because if you feel like no matter what life throws at you, no matter how certain things get or what random scenarios you find yourself in, if you feel like that you could probably figure it out, like you might not have the best answer, but you could probably figure something out, well, you're going to feel really empowered to take a lot more risk, a lot more creative risk. So being comfortable with uncertainty would be the first pillar of creativity. In my mind, it's incredibly important to just understand that it is necessary to be uncertain if you're going to be doing creative things. If you're going to have new ideas, if you're going to try new things, you cannot be certain about it. If it was certain, that would mean it's knowledge. It's not creative, it's knowledge. There's a difference. So if you want to train that creative thinking skill, I hate to break it to you, but you have to go into the unknown. So the second pillar of creativity I want to talk about is drive. I came across a quote the other day by Steve Jobs, and it was, "I want to put a ding in the universe." And to me, that kind of perfectly encapsulated what I'm talking about here. I mean, I have my iPhone in my pocket. I got my MacBook Pro that I'm going to go edit this video on. I have AirPods I listen to podcasts on. Apple's everywhere. There's Apple TV. Steve Jobs clearly made a dent in the universe. But the key fact there is he wanted to. That was like his life's purpose, is he wanted to make a ding in the universe. He wanted his life to be memorable. He wanted to do creative things, and he wanted to be innovative. And that's the most crucial, fundamental aspect of being a creative thinker, is that drive to want to be a creative thinker. Like, nobody gets a six-pack without first wanting to have a six-pack. Nobody becomes rich without first wanting to become rich. And you need to have that desire, that drive that's going to get you through all those uncertain times to kind of catalyze the desire and the drive to be a creative person, to take those risks and put yourself on the line in these uncertain situations time and time again. Because there's going to be a lot of failure, there's going to be a lot of trial and error, and if you're not willing to just take those risks, and if you don't have that drive to pick you up every time you fall, you're not going to get there. So the first thing you got to do is figure out, why do you want to be creative? Why is being creative an important thing to do? What is it? What value does it add to your life? What purpose? What meaning does it add? How can it help other people? All these questions are really important to ask yourself, because if you understand why it's so important to do art, or to make music, or to create videos, or to tell stories, or to be able to think independently and come up with solutions, or to do science, if you can clearly define these things for yourself, you will always have a reservoir of motivation for when times get tough. And if you have that reservoir of motivation, you will definitely become more creative over time, because you're always just going to be like, have that in the back of your head. Like, nah, I'm a creative thinker. I don't just throw up my hands and say, I can't figure this out. I figure things out. That's what I do. That's who I am. Once your identity is tied to that, then it just becomes a really strong association. All you got to do is wake up and just be it every single day. So the third pillar of creativity I want to talk about is the creative mindset. Now, you've heard of a fixed mindset and you've heard of a growth mindset. And if you haven't, I'll briefly explain. A fixed mindset basically believes that you are born with certain innate traits and it's not really changeable throughout life. So you're born with a certain IQ, a certain capability for creative thinking, a certain capability for your physical skills, and that can't really change throughout life. There's always going to be some genetic limits and some outliers and stuff, but in general, people have the capacity to grow far beyond what they believe. So we don't want to have a fixed mindset, because those people tend to be less fulfilled in life and less creative and more resigned to their fate, and not have like a whole lot of self-efficacy or feeling like they can positively affect the world. Growth mindset individuals, on the other hand, tend to think that they can make changes in their life. They can make changes in the world. They can grow to be smarter, more creative, do more than they thought originally was possible. And the creative mindset kind of falls in line with the growth mindset, but it adds another layer that just simply believing you can be creative will make you more creative. And studies have shown this. There have been studies showing that if you do something called creative priming before you do a creative task, so before you go in for a job interview, before you write a new song, before you paint, whatever it is for you, if you think back on a time where you were able to tolerate uncertainty and to come up with novel solutions that were useful to you, you will be more creative in that moment that you're trying to be. There's a bunch of great research on it, and it's a really amazing thing. It just goes to show the power of the mindset. Another really interesting thing is that just changing the definition of creativity affected how creative participants were. Basically what they did is they asked participants what they believed the definition of creativity was, and then gave them different definitions. So there's this model of creativity that goes from little c to big C. But basically, big C creativity would be these really grand, innovative, world-changing creative ideas that come in and just change the way we think about everything. This would be like Darwin's theory of evolution or the invention of electricity. These would be huge, big C innovations. And so people who grow up thinking that that's what creativity is like the Steve Jobs of the world, the Thomas Edisons, those people tend to think that they're not creative because they haven't changed the world in that way, right? And when they think that creativity is equated to genius, they think it's out of reach for them, and they end up testing lower for creativity scores. But what's interesting is that when these participants learn that there's something called little c, which is essentially the definition of creativity that we started with at the beginning of this video, which is that creativity is novel and useful solutions to you, okay? So that could be a very personal level. Like I could write a new song on guitar, and just because it's not going to change the world and I'm not going to become the next Justin Bieber or something, it's still a creative act for me. And those people who understood that creativity is a spectrum from little c to big C, they tested for higher rates of creativity after understanding that that was the actual definition of it. So just changing what the definition of creativity was affected the mindset so powerfully that the people who understood that, oh, creativity is actually this really everyday thing that's a part of everyone's life, and it is a spectrum, and I could actually probably get better at it because these other people have been able to get better at it. It enhances that mindset that you can be creative, that you can grow towards more, and life isn't as fixed as you might have thought when you were younger. Like anything's possible. And I did a whole video on this topic. I'll link in the captions below. It's all about the creative mindset. It's very interesting. The fourth pillar of creativity I want to talk about is creativity is domain specific. Creativity as a skill would be considered like a meta skill. Creative thinking is like this meta skill that applies to all skills. So if you get in the mindset of thinking creatively, like being uncomfortable with uncertainty, being self-efficacious, so just feeling like you can create new ideas, new solutions to problems, that's the creative mindset. That is not domain specific. That could apply to anything in life. But the caveat here is that to be innovative, to have highly creative ideas, does require domain specificity. And what do I mean by that? Well, imagine like dots, right? They always say creativity is this act of collecting dots and then connecting dots. Domain specificity is collecting more dots in a specific subject matter. So if you want to be a really great writer, it would require you to know a lot about writing. It would require you to write a lot, to read a lot of writers, and to study a lot of writing. Now, somebody who's completely new to writing and has no knowledge of what the proper techniques are or how to actually be good or what the rules and the fundamentals are can come in and start to write, and it might appear creative to them, but to people who are further along in the field, master writers, would look at it as amateur because they would see a lot of the flaws and the mistakes in their writing and how a lot of what they're doing is kind of just mimicking things that they've seen subconsciously along the way that they didn't realize they were doing. So to become a master, to become an innovator in the field, to become really creative within a domain requires you to learn a lot about specific domains themselves. If you're going to be innovating the field, if you're going to be coming up with these really creative ideas, you first got to learn the fundamentals and a lot of the theories and principles behind these things so that you get really grounded in the domain so you can start to see where the limitations are, and then you can start to innovate within those limitations. You could push those boundaries. No master ever got to mastery without spending countless hours within that domain really thinking about it, really seeing what the limits were and pushing those boundaries over time. So the meta skill of creative thinking can apply to anything. And that, again, goes back to tolerating uncertainty and being adaptable, being able to think on your feet. But to get really innovative within a field, to become a master of something, requires domain-specific knowledge. So if you have a creative skill that you're working on, like writing, music, art, whatever it is for you, you have to practice it a lot and you have to study it a lot because you got to see what other people are doing, and that might spark that little bit of inspiration that'll give you your new idea to innovate in the field. And that brings me to the last pillar of creativity that I want to talk about, and it's that if we go back to this idea of collecting dots so that we can connect them, then that means the higher quality your dots, the higher quality your connections are going to be. And what do I mean by that? I just mean that if you're going to be consuming information, make sure it's high quality information. If you get most of your learning resources from short form content, things like tweets or TikToks or short little like quippy articles or blog posts or whatever, those are good. They're valuable resources. It is information and it's densely packaged in a tight little form so that you can learn something. But we all know that we don't actually really retain a whole lot of that information, and it's not actually high quality information. And you never even know if it's from an expert or not, right? Anybody can put up a TikTok that says, this is how you do X, Y, and Z, and you don't know how much time they've spent researching this stuff. So what you want to do is spend a lot of time inputting high quality inputs. So this is going to come from stuff like reading books, watching YouTube lectures from professors and stuff, podcasts, really deep, long form podcasts from experts in the field or people who have written books. And the reason authors are so credible is because they spend years writing their book. So they don't just sit down and cram out a book in a weekend, right? I mean, we're talking like a 60,000 word piece that's really well researched and with a lot of personal anecdotes and anecdotes from other people and a lot of history. It takes people years to write these books. So what you get when you read a book is maybe you can read a book in like a week or two, right? But it took that author maybe 4, 5, maybe 10 years of research to get to the point where they could condense that knowledge down to you in a 2-week read. And so that's why it's a really high quality input. Anybody could just shoot off a tweet and then you can read it and go, oh, whoa, cool, that's useful information. But the thing is like you don't know how high quality that information actually is. Whereas an author you at least can be confident that they did the work. Now, you might not agree with their conclusions. There's a lot of authors I don't agree with. And there's a lot of books I've read that actually weren't good at all. But at least I could be confident knowing that they put in the work, because it's not an easy thing to do. Podcasts are really great. I really like Huberman Labs for like neuroscience and, the science of learning and things like that. That's all really useful, high input quality information. And also just learning from the great artists that have come before you. So like if you want to become a really great painter, I mean, you want to study the lives of that painter. What did they do? What was their process for painting? How did they think about it? What were some of the things that they thought were wrong or stupid that other people were doing? How did they challenge the status quo? It's like super interesting to find out the people that you really respect in these fields, to find out what they went to learn. There was like that great era in the 60s of rock and roll where the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin were coming out and everybody was like, oh my God, this music's amazing. Like we've never heard anything like it. But the thing is all those artists were stealing that music. They got all their ideas from artists in the 50s, from America, blues artists and stuff like that. And so if you look at those guys and if you're really fascinated with how they play, well, maybe look and see who did they learn from? What were the things that they grabbed from them? Because that's like a high quality source of connection to pull from. Those are the dots that you want so that you can start connecting and making your own connections. You don't want to be using these low quality sources. They're good for entertainment. They might be good to spark interest and curiosity to do further research, but you don't want to use that as like your method for acquiring knowledge. You want to get this knowledge from high quality sources. And then the most important thing for creative thinking is you've got to question it. That is like the thing that everybody forgets about reading or consuming content, is that there's this actually really interesting thing where when you read words, your brain can't filter them for falseness or trueness. It just accepts information as true as you're reading it. It's only when you stop and ponder what you just read that you're able to question whether it's accurate or if you believe it or if it melds with your worldview. So the most important thing you can do to really start to get new creative ideas, get new creative connections going in your mind, is to pause while you're reading, to pause while you're learning something, and just think about it for a second and go, where have I seen this before? Do I actually believe this? Do I have some questions? Are there some objections I might have to this information? And just asking those questions are going to lead to a whole new slew of ideas so that you'll be able to frame your learning as you continue to study these masters, to study these high quality sources of information. So don't forget, crucial part of becoming more creative, acquiring that domain mastery, is to actually stop and just question the things that you're learning. Because even if those things are true, by questioning them and seeing them from a different perspective, you're going to get a more nuanced view of the idea, and you're going to be able to pull ideas from other sources that you might not have thought of before. So there you go. Those are the 5 things I feel like are the most important aspects of creativity. Again, this is just my personal opinion. I'm not a creativity scientist, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm just a guy who loves reading and studying about creativity and playing music and making videos like this. So thanks for watching. Take care.